There are names that echo through millennia like nightmare whispers, carrying with them the weight of ancestral terror that no tongue should ever pronounce. Moloch, just 5 letters forming a word capable of making entire civilizations tremble, prophets scream in horror, and kings burn cities to erase its memory. But why did this specific name survive when so many other ancient gods became mere archaeological curiosities? What makes Moloch different from any other deity forgotten by time? The answer is written in blood, fire, and silence. In temples where bronze melted under flames fed by unimaginable sacrifices. In valleys where the sound of drums tried to muffle screams that should never have existed. Moloch wasn't just another ancient god. It was something that challenged the very definition of divinity, transforming worship into atrocity and faith into nightmare. This is the true story of Moloch, built not just through a single perspective, but gathering fragments from multiple cultures, archaeological texts, and traditions that tried to comprehend the incomprehensible. A journey through historical evidence, academic debates, and interpretations that reveal why this specific name became synonymous with absolute evil. Prepare to discover that the truth about Moloch is even more disturbing than any legend ever told. The first records mentioning Moloch don't reach us through grand temples or worship hymns. They appear as warnings, brutal condemnations written with the urgency of those who witnessed something that should never have existed. In the book of Leviticus, the prohibition is direct and without explanation. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Moloch. Period. No context, no description, just an absolute command followed by the promise of death for those who disobeyed. This absence of explanation is revealing. Ancient scribes felt no need to describe who or what Moloch was because their audience already knew. The horror was so well-known, so universally understood, that merely mentioning the name was enough to evoke all the atrocity associated with it. The prophet Jeremiah provides more details when he describes the valley of Hinnom, where parents burned their children in fire, something that, according to him, God never commanded nor even imagined. This last phrase is especially shocking, nor even imagined, as if the concept of child sacrifice was so alien to divine order that it transcended even omniscience. But here we encounter our first major historical problem. These are all biblical sources, written by a specific culture with its own political and religious motivations. To truly understand Moloch, we need to look beyond the pages of the Bible and examine what other ancient cultures recorded about similar deities. The Carthaginians, descendants of the Phoenicians, possessed a deity called Molech or Malik, whose cult included what they called Molech sacrifice. Archaeological excavations in Carthage revealed infant cemeteries known as top-hets, containing thousands of funerary urns with cremated remains of children and animals. Inscriptions found in these locations suggest that these sacrifices weren't acts of arbitrary cruelty, but desperate rituals performed during extreme crises. Plagues, prolonged droughts, military sieges where the very survival of the city was at stake. This Carthaginian perspective paints a completely different picture. For them, these rituals weren't routine worship of a bloodthirsty god, but last-resort measures, performed reluctantly when all other options were exhausted. Imagine the desperation of a besieged population, watching their provisions run out, their defenses crumble, knowing that the only thing between them and total annihilation was a ritual that demanded the sacrifice of what they loved most. But even with this contextualization, one question remains. Why children? Why did this specific form of sacrifice become associated with this specific name? The answer may lie in the very nature of what these rituals represented. It wasn't just about appeasing a deity, but about demonstrating the absolute level of dedication and desperation. It was about proving that you were willing to destroy your own future, your own lineage, for the promise of immediate salvation. Some modern scholars argue that the word Moloch didn't even originally refer to a specific deity, but to a type of sacrifice. A ritual form that could be offered to different gods depending on the circumstance. This theory suggests that what we know as Moloch may actually be an amalgamation of different ritual practices that, over the centuries, were condensed into a single terrifying figure. Regardless of its exact origin, what is indisputable is the impact this figure had on humanity's collective imagination. Moloch transcended its historical roots to become something much more powerful, an archetype. When early Christians began cataloging and hierarchizing demonic forces, Moloch found its place not as a forgotten deity, but as an active prince of hell. Church fathers like Augustine and Jerome no longer saw it as a dead idol of extinct civilizations, but as a living and malevolent entity that continued operating through different disguises. This transformation from ancient god to medieval demon reflected a fundamental change in Christian understanding of evil. False gods weren't simply human inventions or empty symbols, but real manifestations of demonic forces that sought to corrupt and destroy humanity. Moloch, with its association with child sacrifice, became the perfect example of this corruption. A force that not only deceived its followers but led them to commit the most unnatural acts imaginable. During the medieval period, demonological grimoires began giving physical form to Moloch. It was described as an immense figure forged in bronze, with a bull's head and outstretched arms, its hollow body serving as a living furnace. Priests would light fires inside the statue until its arms became incandescent, then place offerings upon them while drums beat incessantly to muffle the sounds of agony. But we must be careful with these descriptions. They come not from eyewitnesses or archaeological records, but from medieval imaginations trying to give physical form to conceptual horror. The truth is that we possess no reliable contemporary description of Moloch's physical appearance or its rituals. What we have are later interpretations, each filtered through the cultural and religious lens of their authors. What these descriptions tell us, however, is how different eras understood and feared the concept of Moloch. It became the personification of sacrifice devoid of love, obedience without soul, ritualized destruction of innocence in the name of higher goals. And perhaps that's exactly what makes Moloch so disturbing and enduring as a symbol. It doesn't represent just ancient evil, but systemic evil. The kind of evil that dresses itself as necessity, that transforms atrocity into ritual, that convinces normal people to do unthinkable things because a larger system demands it. This systemic nature of Moloch explains why it continued appearing in different forms throughout history. John Milton reimagined it in Paradise Lost as a warrior demon who advocates open war against heaven, preferring honest destruction to dishonest submission. For Milton, Moloch represented brutality without dissimulation, violence that at least had the honesty not to hide behind elaborate justifications. Centuries later, Allen Ginsberg invoked it in Howl as a metaphor for American industrial society, transforming it into the god of machines that devours dreams and humanity in the name of efficiency and progress. In verses that became iconic, Ginsberg described Moloch as mind of pure machinery, blood of running money, fingers of 10 armies. No longer a god of bronze and fire, but of steel and bureaucracy. This evolution of Moloch from ancient deity to modern metaphor reveals something profound about how we understand evil in different eras. For the ancients, evil was personalized in specific gods who demanded specific rituals. For medievals, it was a demonic hierarchy organized in direct opposition to God. For moderns, it became systemic, social, economic, and political structures that consume human lives to maintain their functioning. But perhaps the most disturbing interpretation of Moloch is the one that sees it not as an external force, but as something we continuously create through our own choices. In modern conspiracy theories, Moloch is invoked to explain secret rituals of powerful elites, but even these theories reflect a broader truth. Our suspicion that those in power are willing to sacrifice the vulnerable to maintain their position. We don't need to believe in specific conspiracies to recognize that we live in systems that routinely sacrifice human welfare for profit, security for convenience, future for present. Moloch became the name we give to this relentless logic that transforms people into statistics, children into collateral damage, suffering into necessity. The real question isn't whether Moloch existed as a specific historical deity, but why we continue needing it as a concept. Why did this particular name survive when so many other ancient gods became academic curiosities? The answer may lie in the fact that, unlike other gods who promised rewards for worship, Moloch represents something different. Power that demands everything and promises nothing beyond its own perpetuation. It is the god of systems that became larger than their creators, that demand constant feeding but are never satisfied. The god of bureaucracies that crush individuals to maintain procedures, of economies that destroy communities to maximize profits, of ideologies that sacrifice humanity for purity. And perhaps that's why Moloch continues appearing in our art, literature, and political discourse. Not because we literally believe in a bronze demon that devours children, but because we recognize the pattern it represents. The gradual transformation of human institutions into forces that consume exactly what they should protect. The Valley of Hinnom still exists, of course. Today it's a park in Jerusalem where families have picnics and children play. The fires were extinguished millennia ago, the drums fell silent, the bronze statues were destroyed or forgotten. But Moloch didn't disappear, it simply changed form. It exists now in every system that asks us to sacrifice our children on the altar of progress, whether through unnecessary wars, environmental negligence, or economic structures that steal the future from coming generations. It's present whenever we're convinced that cruelty is necessary, that compassion is impractical, that we have no choice but to feed the machine. The true lesson of Moloch's story isn't about an ancient god that demanded human sacrifices. It's about our continuous capacity to create modern gods that demand exactly the same thing, just with more sophisticated language and more abstract rituals. It's about how we continue building bronze furnaces, we just call them by different names: economic necessity, national security, inevitable progress. Moloch never died because it was never really about a specific deity. It was always about a human tendency, our willingness to sacrifice what we love for what we fear to lose. And as long as this tendency persists, as long as we continue confusing power with necessity and cruelty with realism, Moloch will continue finding new altars, new rituals, new ways to convince us that we have no choice but to feed it. Perhaps the only way to truly defeat Moloch is to recognize it not as an external force, but as an internal possibility. A constant temptation to solve complex problems through simple sacrifices, to seek solutions that require others to pay the price for our tranquility. The story of Moloch is, ultimately, a mirror. And what we see reflected in it depends on how honestly we're willing to examine the systems we serve, the sacrifices we tolerate, and the prices we're willing to let others pay for our own sense of security and order. The fire still burns. The drums still play. The only question is whether we can hear the music before it's our turn to dance.